I called 911 on my own house from a hotel room in Boise, Idaho, while watching strangers turn my living room into a debaucherous party via a security camera. The problem was, those strangers were paying customers. The people running the business were none other than my parents, the only people with a spare key. It all started with a warning about screaming and ended with my mother screaming that I had destroyed our family. But when trust is weaponized against you, is silence the right choice? My name is Wyatt, a U.S. Army Special Forces Sergeant. My life is built on three things: order, discipline, and predictability. Everything has its place, and every action has a purpose. After 2 weeks of combat training, my body craved only one thing: silence. Not the tense silence before a raid, but genuine stillness, in a place I knew was safe. For me, that place was my home. It was where I could take off my armor, both literally and figuratively, and be myself again. It was my fortress, built on order, discipline, and predictability. But that day, peace wasn't waiting for me at the door. I was just unloading my heavy duffel bag from my pickup truck when Greg, my neighbor from across the street, approached me. He's a good-natured man whose biggest concern seemed to be keeping his lawn free of a single stray blade of grass. His face today was different, though, with a hint of concern. "There's been screaming coming from your house," he said bluntly, skipping the usual pleasantries. I stopped and turned to face him, letting the words sink in. For a moment, my mind ran through logical possibilities. A horror movie, on too loud, a domestic argument. But all of them were ruled out. Only my mother had a spare key, and she knew how I felt about chaos, and she rarely came to visit. Seeing my lack of reaction, Greg continued, his voice lower as if afraid of being overheard. "And it didn't sound like fighting or a party, Wyatt. My wife and I both heard it. It sounded like someone in pain. Very loud. We almost called the police a few times." Immediately, my brain switched to analysis mode. All fatigue disappeared, replaced by the cold efficiency honed through hundreds of missions. My analysis was instantaneous. I knew Greg wasn't one to exaggerate. He was a reliable source. And the location was my house, which meant the security perimeter had been breached. The nature of the event was unclear, but the screaming and pain was a clear sign of hostility. All of it led to a single, cold conclusion. This was no longer an inconvenience. This was a home invasion. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice maintaining its usual calm. "Thank you, Greg. I'll check it out." I didn't ask any more questions. The initial intelligence was sufficient. I picked up my bag and walked toward the front door, each step deliberate and purposeful. My mission had changed. Rest and recovery were canceled. New objective: identify and neutralize the threat. The front door was locked, with no signs of forced entry. I inserted the key into the lock, a familiar motion, but the unease from Greg's words lingered. When the door opened, the first thing that hit me wasn't the familiar air of my home, but a strange smell. The scent of lemon-scented cleaner and floor wax. It was sharp and sterile. My house never smelled like that. The wooden floor under my feet was strangely clean, the faint light from the window, enough to show it. I only ever kept my house neat for convenience, not for display. This cleanliness felt like a message. An invasion doesn't always require a broken door. Sometimes, a key is enough. I moved silently, checking each area, every step calculated. The living room, the kitchen, everything was impossibly clean. Not a single magazine was out of place, not a single cup left on the counter. It felt like walking through a model home, not where I lived. The heart of the fortress had been occupied and rearranged by a foreign hand. I walked upstairs. When I entered my bedroom, my eyes immediately locked onto the bed. The corners of my blanket were always folded into sharp hospital corners. Taut as a drum, a habit from my early military days, but this time was different. The comforter was folded back neatly at the head of the bed. Like a five-star hotel, the pillows were propped up, soft and waiting, not laid flat as I always left them. This wasn't cleaning. This was an invitation. This violation felt personal. Someone had entered my most private space, laid on my bed, and then rearranged everything to their liking. A cold, razor-sharp anger surged up in me. Not a furious blaze, but a frigid blade. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the strange softness of the blanket. I took out my phone. Only one person could have entered the house. Only one spare key existed. There was only one suspect, my mother. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice suspiciously cheerful. "Wyatt, my darling, I thought you were still busy." I got straight to the point. My voice was flat, emotionless. "Were you in my house?" "Oh, yes," she replied, her cheerfulness not diminishing. "I dropped by to water your plants. Saw the house was a bit messy, so I tidied up a little. What do you think?" "It's much cleaner, isn't it?" "Tidy," I said. Greg said he heard screaming. There was a second of silence on the other end. Then a light laugh, a laugh calculated to reassure. "Oh, that old Greg? He's just getting senile. He must have been watching a scary movie too loudly. Your house was perfectly quiet. I can assure you, the lie was so perfect, as if it had been prepared in advance." I didn't argue. I didn't question. In combat, when you identify an enemy's position, you don't scream to let them know you've found them. You stay silent and plan your next move. "Right," I said, my voice still flat. "I was just asking. I have to go." I ended the call before she could say anything else. I sat there in the sterile bedroom, on a strange bed that wasn't mine. Now I knew. And I knew what I had to do next. I put my phone down. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy. For others, a mother stopping by to clean might be normal, but for me it wasn't. Her explanation was completely illogical, and that was the alarming part. My mother, Carol, had never cared about the cleanliness of my house. She and my father had always considered my disciplined lifestyle cold and lacking in vitality. They didn't approve of me joining the military, seeing it as a betrayal of their peaceful ideals, a dangerous and low-paying job that brought no real value to society. Our relationship had long been reduced to superficial holiday phone calls. So her sudden decision to drive all the way here, just to clean, was an action completely out of character for her. In a tactical sense, it was an anomaly. A memory flashed through my mind, reminding me of the inherent distance between us. It was a call just a few weeks after I bought the house. My sister, Chloe, had gotten into another huge debt. My mother called, not to congratulate me on the new house, but to ask for my help. I calmly explained that I couldn't. I reminded her that I had scraped together every penny to buy this house, even asking my parents for a small loan and being refused with the reason that I had to stand on my own 2 feet. Now, having drained my finances, I couldn't help. I hoped they would understand. But instead of sympathy, my mother's voice on the other end of the line became cold and harsh. "You always have an excuse," she said. "You sit in your big house and talk about hardship, while your sister is really suffering. We were wrong to think success would make you more generous. It's just made you more selfish, only living for yourself." That memory made everything clear. That hypocrisy and unfairness had created an irreparable rift. My mother's lie was not just suspicious now. It was proof that they were willing to do anything for Chloe. Regardless of logic or my feelings, I realized that in their eyes, I and my assets were just a tool. The cold anger in me now had a clear target. My mother's lie was a disguise. The screaming Greg heard was a signal, and this clean house was the crime scene. My information was still incomplete. I needed more data. I needed to know the scale of this invasion. I stood up. Leaving the violated bedroom, it was time to go back and talk to Greg. This time not to listen, but to ask. Greg was in his yard, focused on pruning some rose bushes, completely unaware of what had just happened in my house. He looked up when he saw me approach, his face a little worried, as if afraid he had caused trouble. "Find anything, Wyatt?" I got straight to the point. "You said you heard screaming a few times. Do you remember exactly when?" Greg blinked, clearly not expecting my question. He put down his pruning shears. "Let me think. There was one time a few nights ago, very late, around midnight. Before that?" I asked, my tone more like an interrogation than a conversation. "Before that?" He scratched his chin, looking toward my house as if the memories were stored there. "Yes, there was. Definitely. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to meddle in other people's business, but there was one time in early June. I remember because it was right before my daughter's dance recital. And another time, further back, around March. June, March, those dates matched my schedule. Besides the screaming. Did you see anything else?" I continued. "Cars? People?" "Yes." He nodded emphatically. "That's the strange thing. On those nights there were a lot of strange cars parked along the street. Cars I'd never seen before. And there were people going in and out of your house. A lot of people. Men, women. I didn't recognize any of them." I nodded, my brain having processed what it needed to know. "Thank you, Greg." I turned and walked straight back to my house, leaving Greg standing there with a confused look. I didn't have time to explain. Inside, I opened my military laptop. It booted up quickly, with no unnecessary applications. I accessed my work record system, scrolling through my schedule for the past 6 months. The results appeared on the screen, cold and clear. Trip to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the 8th of March to 12. Training in Germany, the 1st of June to 5, and the most recent combat training, the last 2 weeks of August. Every event Greg described perfectly matched a time I was absent. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a systematically planned and executed operation, taking advantage of my absence. The enemy had established a pattern, and when the enemy has a pattern, they become predictable, easy to corner. My next trip was already scheduled. A deployment meeting in Boise, Idaho. 3 days. The house would be empty again, and my mother, who knew my schedule, would certainly find some reason to drop by. I closed the laptop. A plan began to form in my head, clear and precise as a campaign map. It was time to prepare the battlefield. My plan didn't need to be complex, just precise. A direct confrontation with my mother at this point would be a tactical error. It would only lead to an argument that would go nowhere, and she would deny everything, playing the role of the wronged mother. I didn't need an argument. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed video. I went online and ordered 5 miniature security cameras, the best I could find, cloud, connected, with audio recording, motion detection, and night vision. They were delivered in an unmarked box the next day. That night, my house became a deployment zone. I worked methodically, silently, and efficiently. The first camera was hidden in the living room. I carved a small hole in the spine of a thick military book on the shelf. The tiny lens pointed directly at the entire room. The second was in the kitchen, nestled neatly above the cabinet, the lens looking down through a small gap in the decorative molding. The third was hidden in the leaves of a fake plant in the hallway, a perfect position to observe both the entrance and the stairs. The fourth was right at the front door, behind a small ventilation grill, and the last one, the most important, was in my bedroom. I hid it inside an old alarm clock on the nightstand. The lens aimed directly at the violated bed. I connected all of them to a private network, accessible from my phone anywhere in the world. The trap was set. Now, it was time for the bait. The evening before my flight, I sent my mother a text message, my tone intentionally normal. "Mom, I'm flying to Boise tomorrow morning. I'll be gone for 3 days." I didn't mention watering the plants or cleaning. I let her fill in the blanks herself. The reply came almost immediately. "Oh, all right, darling. I'll drop by to water your plants then. You know, to keep them fresh. Have a safe trip." She had taken the bait. The next morning, as I locked the door behind me on the way to the airport, I didn't feel anxious. I felt like a sniper who had found his position, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Now I just had to wait for the target to appear. In Boise, I completed my work with my usual efficiency. Meetings were held, problems were solved. But a part of my mind wasn't in the conference room. It was hundreds of miles away, in my house, watching through 5 invisible eyes. The first night passed in silence. The cameras only recorded empty rooms. But on the second night, the targets appeared. I was sitting in my hotel room, reviewing documents for the morning meeting, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Motion detected at front door. I opened the app. My heart didn't beat faster. My breathing remained steady. This was the moment I had prepared for. On the screen, the image from the front door camera appeared, slightly grainy in the dim light. The door opened, and a figure walked in. Not my mother, a large, broad-shouldered man carrying a duffel bag. He walked in with the confidence of someone familiar with the place, without a hint of hesitation. 2 minutes later, another person. Then another, a woman with long hair and a bottle of wine in her hand. A man carrying a folding chair. One by one, they entered my fortress as if it were a public bar. No one knocked. No one spoke loudly. They moved with an alarming synergy. The cold anger inside me began to solidify. I kept watching. The image from the living room camera appeared. The room was now crowded with people. They sat on my sofas, leaned against the walls, spread their belongings on the floor. The lights were turned down low. There was quiet, melodic music. There was muffled laughter. Then a man took off his shirt, tossing it onto my armchair. A woman pulled out a small black box, opening it on my coffee table. Even though the image wasn't very clear, I could still make out the items inside. Something leather, something shiny. Another woman walked barefoot through the hallway, holding a silk ribbon that looked like a blindfold. As she passed the bookshelf, she giggled and glanced toward the camera, not directly at it, just in that direction. But in that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. My house, my sofas, the table where I put my coffee cup every morning, I didn't need to see anymore. The data was sufficient. The evidence was clear. To me, this wasn't a party. It was an organized breaking and entering, and there was only one standard response for a situation like this. I pulled out my phone, calmly dialing 3 numbers. The voice of the dispatcher came on. My voice was flat, precise, and emotionless, as if I were reading a report. "This is Sergeant Wyatt Cole. I'm currently deployed out of state. My security system shows a large number of strangers have illegally entered and are gathering at my private residence at the address." I provided the address, answering the questions concisely. "Yes, I'm watching them right now. About 15 to 20 people. I don't recognize any of them. Yes, I want immediate police intervention." I ended the call. Then I reopened the camera app on my phone, switching to the multi-view of all the rooms. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, silent red and blue lights began to flash across the living room windows, casting ghostly streaks of light on the bare walls. I watched through the hallway camera. The front door was thrown open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, moving quickly and purposefully. Behind them were others. Chaos ensued immediately. The living room camera showed pure panic. The music cut off. The guests who were relaxing just minutes before now scrambled to put on their clothes. trying to find an escape. But there was no escape. All police commands were clear and decisive. I didn't watch them get handcuffed. I didn't need to. I only watched until the last person was led out of the house. Then the house fell silent again, empty, with only the mess of a raided party and officers moving about, checking things. The mission was complete. The immediate threat had been neutralized. I closed the app, but about an hour later, my phone rang. It wasn't the police. It was my mother. I answered, not saying a word. Her voice on the other end was no longer a false cheerfulness. It was pure panic. "Vet, the police called your father and me." My voice was still flat and cold. "I reported a break-in. That's what I saw. That's the truth." "No!" she almost screamed. "They weren't intruders. They told the police they paid. They said we were running it. They have emails, a website. You have to tell the police you knew about this." So the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Paid. Running it. Website. This wasn't a mistake. This was a business. "You have to tell them you gave permission," she pleaded, her voice now mixed with anger. "Say it was just a misunderstanding." I remained silent. My silence seemed to infuriate her. "You've ruined everything. You called the police on your own family. We did this to help Chloe. Why are you so selfish?" I listened to the accusations, analyzing them coldly. Not a single apology, no remorse, just blame. After she finished, with only her gasping for breath on the phone, I answered. A single sentence, clear and decisive. "You did this to yourself." Then I hung up. I finished my trip in Boise like a machine. Meetings, reports, handshakes. Everything went according to plan. No one knew that while I was discussing logistics, a part of my mind was processing an invasion on a completely different scale. Officer Brennan, who was in charge of the case, called me back on the last day. His voice was tired but professional. He confirmed my mother's words. The guests had provided proof of payments. They had shown the police a website, discreetly but professionally designed, advertising private, curated gatherings at a secure location in suburban Denver. The website even had a schedule of events, and each date matched one of my trips. He didn't have to say anything else. The picture was complete. My parents hadn't just borrowed my house. They had turned it into a business, a brothel in disguise. Before my flight home, my phone rang. It was Chloe, I answered, preparing for what was to come. "I hope you're happy." My sister's voice sobbed, full of resentment. "You've destroyed everything." I stayed silent. "They did this to help me. Now they're in big trouble with the police, and it's all your fault. Why are you so selfish?" The familiar blame, the deliberate naivety. I had heard these words my whole life. But this time, I had no patience left. My voice was cold. "Did they ask your permission before turning my house into a brothel, Chloe?" The other end of the line went silent, and then my sister hung up. The house greeted me with the silence of a cleaned-up crime scene. The police tape had been removed, but the air was still heavy. I could feel the traces of those strangers everywhere. I would never be able to look at this house the same way again. They arrived in the evening. Without warning, my parents, looking older and tired, but their eyes held no remorse, only defensiveness. "We were just trying to help Chloe," my mother began, her voice trembling with anger, not sadness. "You have a whole empty house, Wyatt," my father added. "It's such a waste." I listened to their justifications. They talked about community, about sharing space, about me not understanding their burden. Throughout the entire conversation, there wasn't a single apology. No remorse. They didn't see what they had done wrong. And that was the final answer I needed. They left. No hug, no goodbye. Only the heavy silence of a burned bridge. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I couldn't. I stayed in a cheap hotel near the base, where everything was anonymous and belonged to no one. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. I got straight to the point. I want to sell my house as quickly as possible. The agent seemed surprised by my urgency, but she was professional enough not to ask questions. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to negotiate. I just wanted to get out. The entire process went quickly, without a single word to my family. They probably still thought I was living there, angry, and that I would eventually cool down. They were wrong. When the papers were signed, the first thing I did was drive to a phone store and buy a new number. The old number, along with all the missed calls and messages from them, was gone. My new apartment was smaller, had better security, and was closer to the base. It didn't have a backyard or a guest room. It only had a solid door and 4 walls that I completely controlled. That was enough. They never found me. They had turned my fortress into a battlefield. And in war, when a position can no longer be defended, you don't try to hold on to it. You retreat strategically, reinforce your lines, and eliminate the threat. That threat, though it bore the name family, had been eliminated. Some people say I overreacted. Others say I was still too lenient. Were my actions too extreme, or still not enough?